So, Karen Saunders, thank you very much for speaking with me. Let's start at the very beginning. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Detroit, Michigan, in January 9th, 1956.
So that makes you a Capricorn.
Yes,
So I think of Capricorn people as very determined, down to earth, achieve their goals. Does that fit you?
yes, it does. I try.
Right.
Sometimes I have lofty goals.
Mm. When you were growing up, I know your mother founded the Unity Church in Nebraska, right? And
Yes,
when you were a little girl, what was the faith that you were raised with by your family?
Christian Science.
Ah, ah, and that's interesting to me because there were a whole slew of new religions started in the 19th century that were founded by women, like Mary
Yes.
Baker Eddy and
Hmm.
Myrtle Filimore and her husband, and um, the Shakers had strong women leadership. Seventh Day Adventist was founded by a woman.
Oh,
Um,
I didn't know.
yeah. Um, so is it fair to say that in your upbringing, the role of women was a strong one in terms of
Yes.
the religious teachings? Because in Christian Science, don't they talk about mother, father, God?
Well, I'll have to be honest, Gail. I was in Christian Science when I was very young. And then I've been in unity for so long that it's ingrained in me, and I really couldn't tell you if that was the basis. I remember some of the things from Christian Science, and certainly as I studied did my ministerial studies, that uh, Christian Science was also a part of the New Thought, of course, a part of the New Thought religion, which at that point, and I guess I knew we were different, but I didn't know how when I was growing up. But, to remember what what terms we used, I can't tell you that.
Right. Did when you were a little girl, did you read Wee Wisdom for children?
Um, More than likely, yes. I can't, again, that's something that I don't recall. My mother ordered a lot of magazines for me, and I love to read and read a lot of books. So I know that I had magazines come to the house, but I couldn't tell you specifically.
Well, I bet $100 that you had Wee Wisdom. And what's sad is that they're not publishing it anymore for children, and there's such
Right.
a
Yeah.
need. So I think that's a void that needs to be filled. They should at least republish old versions because I don't think they really go out of date, the stories for children.
That's true. Just like they have the Daily Word online, that's something that they might bring back, even if it's online versus publishing again.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Is the Daily Word still published new, or do they do reprints?
Oh no, it's published new.
Uh huh.
But I think you can go back to at least 1924 online and pull up anything. I go back and look at different dates. I just pull up different dates, or I'll pull up a subject and I can go back as far as I want to go.
Ah. Um, well, for people who don't know what New Thought means, what are those churches? Which churches does it include? How does it start? Who are key thinkers?
Well, I can give you a few. I really couldn't give you all of them. Again, as I was doing some studying, I found out Christian Science was one of the bases because Mary Baker Eddy started with um, metaphysics and talking about being healed by God. And of course, the Christian Scientists do not believe in doctors or hospitals and that sort of thing. The New Thought religions do. But you have Unity, CSL, and there's a few others, and I apologize, I don't know all the names of them right off.
Well, I was raised in the Church of Religious Science, which is now
Yes.
called Centers for Spiritual Enrichment. And what is CSL?
Um, I think it's Christian Science Living. I would have to look that up again. That's not, I know it by the acronyms, but
Oh,
not
okay.
specifically.
Okay. And what is metaphysics? What is New Thought? What does that really mean in contrast to say being raised as a Presbyterian?
Okay. So the way I understand it, or the way I would explain it, is, Presbyterian, Catholicism, Lutheran, those are your traditional Christian religions. And so New Thought goes a little bit different because it believes in metaphysics, which is the philosophy. So whereas Catholicism and Presbyterian are religions, New Thought is thinking more on the philosophy of what is God, what is our relationship to God. So it's more of the philosophy. New Thought is bringing new ideas, bringing a different way of thought process other than, sin and hell and the negative things, but looking at the positive things of what God can create for us.
What was really emphasized in the Church of Religious Science that I was raised in is that your thought creates your life. So
Yes.
be positive and be mindful of what kind of thoughts you generate.
Yes.
And
it is your thoughts create your world. So depending upon what thoughts you want to hold will create, and this is the energy that you will draw to you.
That it's the law of attraction kind of thing.
Yes. Yes.
What your family background is African American. The church has been very important for African Americans because it was only one of the only places they could congregate without having racists breathing down their necks. Could you say about the role of the church for African Americans?
Okay, so the history of the African American church in the United States, as you mentioned, was where they could go for religion, but it was also a gathering place because so it was a social outing, it was a political outing. You got the information. It became educational also because it was not only the religious basis, because, well, you went to church for the word or to have the spiritual relationship with God, but it was also when the African American church was founded in the United States, there was a distance to travel. Most people worked 6 days, 7 days a week. So when they went to church, that was their social gathering. They worked it was manual labor. It was not computers sitting at a desk. So, this was the time that they could meet with their neighbors. Again, talking about politics, this is where the information was disseminated in the community. So it was the gathering place for the community, as well as, when you look at the traditional or the historical Black colleges and universities, most of them were started by religious institutions. Again, for the education. Coming out of slavery, this was the place that they could go to learn to read and to write. And as the institutions grew, then they, also created the colleges so that they could get a higher learning.
Right. What strikes me is that some of the southern states are trying to keep people from voting on Sundays because they don't want the ministers in black churches to say, go out and vote, congregants. And so it's a big issue of racism even today.
Yeah, and the thing about it is even though the Voting Act was passed in the 1960s, it was not created as an amendment, so it has to be voted on every so many years. So at any point, even today, that if there is enough people, they could vote down the Voting Act, and that would cross out a number of African American people. And not just African American, but that's where it starts.
Right. And I think the Supreme Court weakened parts of the Voting Act. So it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 2 steps backward, 1 step forward. It's
right.
So could you say a word about the history of unity? I know that it was founded by Charles and Myrtle Filimore in 1889 in Kansas City after she was cured of TB, and they thought it was due to spiritual intervention that she was healed. Could you say more about the beginnings of unity and some of the key principles?
Well, of course, again, Myrtle had TB for all of her life, and they had really only given her 6 months to live.
Oh.
And she was very sickly. She had children, she had a husband, and she had tried everything. Did not know, she was really looking at her deathbed. She didn't have anything else to look at, and they went to a lecture by E.B. Weeks, and from this lecture he said, "I am a child of God, therefore I do not inherit any illness, sickness, or pain." And she took that away. And it didn't, it wasn't like she went home and prayed and everything was healed. It took her 2 years of concentrated prayer every day for 2 years, but her body was healed. Now, she was a young woman at that time. I believe she was in her 20s, and she did live into her 80s. As a result of that, she never got rid of the TB, but she was able to live with that, and people heard about it again. You think about this, in the late 1800s, nobody had telephones, no one had internet, it wasn't something that was publicized, but people heard. And so someone would say, well, this woman over here healed her body. And people started coming to her for prayer. And it got to the point she started receiving letters and phone calls that there was a group of I believe it was a group of women who prayed every night at 9 o'clock. And so then that's what kind of spread was, at 9 o'clock, wherever you were, stop to pray. And for whatever you needed to connect with, stop to pray. Well, the other part of that was on Charles, her husband. He had a hip injury as a young boy, and so he had a limp. And he saw what was done, and he started to pray. But not only did he start to pray, he started looking for the scientific demonstration of what it was. So he started studying all religions, or a number of religions, I should say, to determine, what is this? How does this happen? And as a result, between the prayer, which eventually turned into silent unity, and his research, this is the foundation of what unity was, or what unity is. What we believe is that there's only one presence and one power, God. There is only one God. And as you mentioned, or we mentioned earlier, that we create our world by the words that we speak, that we are positive, and we can move in a new and greater way by the thoughts that are held in mind. So these are, the tenets that unity was built on. and has carried through from 1889 to 2023.
When President Biden was speaking yesterday about the attack by Hamas on Israel, he said it's pure evil. And I'm trying to kind of come to grips with, I don't think either you or I believe that God has a body and Satan is a, red horned, fork tail body. What is your understanding of evil?
Well, my understanding of evil is that it is man's thought that is separate from God. And so God gave us free will. God didn't say, oh, here, I'm going to make all of you the best that you can be. Otherwise we would be robots. What he did was give us free will, that we could believe in him. We can believe the best of us. We can know that if God is love, I am love. Or we can have our own, I can't think of the word I want to use, but our own intuition to say, I can do our ego. That's the word I'm looking for. Our ego to say, I want control over everything. And so that's where evil comes from, is man's ego that says that I have to be in control, that I have to have all of it. I have to be greedy and grab and say that I'm going to take away from another person. If God created each and every one of us, then God is going to provide for all of us. We do not have to worry about it because we will be provided for. If we are God's children, then we will be provided for. God is not going to say, oh, well, I'm going to create you over here, but I'm not going to give you any food or water. And oh, I'm going to create you over here, and I'm going to give you millions of dollars and all of the resources. God says that I place you here that you may share. And so the issue of my definition of evil is man's ego and the greed that comes from that ego. So if you let go of that ego and open yourself up to love, you will draw all of the resources that you need for yourself and for your family.
Fundamentalists like Southern Baptists say, no, because of Adam and Eve's fault especially, we're all born sinners, and the only way we can not go to hell when we die is if we accept that Jesus redeemed her sin by suffering on the cross. So what do you say to that?
Well, again, that's man's free will. And so what I say to that is, you are able to celebrate your religious belief according to what you believe. That's not what I believe, but I'm not going to tell you how to believe. But the bottom line is I can come together with you to say that there is only one God. And so again, that is man's choice, and we are all put on what I believe is we're all put here as an experience. And so, what my experience and what my spiritual growth is at this given point in time, spirit is eternal. So I don't know how much farther I have to go, if I'm just in the infant steps, or if I'm, millions of years old. And so for that person in their thought process, that's what they're dealing with. And they would be able to move on spiritually as they mature.
So what do you think happens to you when your body dies?
My body is what I call a shell, a house. And the house, in anything, if you live in a house, sometimes that house is going to deteriorate. and you will move on to another house. When the house is no longer able to hold, when the house no longer will move to a different house. So my spirit lives on. Spirit is eternal. I can't tell you what my next journey is, but I know that my spirit will live on to celebrate God and celebrate life in a different way. My body is just the housing, just the shell to hold the spirit at this time.
So do you believe in reincarnation, or do you believe in a kind of literal heaven, a place, afterlife? What, any ideas?
Well, I think I tend to lean more to reincarnation than I do that there's a heaven. You know, I can't tell you, oh no, you're going to go off in the sky and just sit and relax. But I know the energy is there. The energy is going to live on. How it is reincarnated, if it comes back as a person, I don't know. But I can tell you on a few examples with young people that there have been some things that have occurred through young people that you know they didn't learn it as babies. You know, if you sit and talk to babies, and when I say young people, I'm talking about probably under the age of 5. Sometimes they come up with knowledge that there is no way that they could know at the age of 5. You know, I had an experience with my son, and I just had to stop and pause with the answer that he gave to me. You know, and so I think that is something that occurs. I can't tell you, I don't have any proof, but I know the spirit lives on, so that energy comes back in some form or manner.
The best proof I know is the University of Virginia's School of Perceptual Studies, with over 2,500 cases of children who remember very specific details of their past lives. And they check them out. They don't just write down the story. They go to where the site is and interview people and that kind of thing. They're amazing stories. What about your son? Did he ever? My son, I had him go to the Church of Religious Science, and he loved the camp. But I think he's been skeptical, partly because it's part of rebellion to not just accept what your parents say. So I wonder what his reaction has been to unity and New Thought.
Well, he lives it. He still attends Unity when he can. He works a lot of Sundays, so he's not in service, but certainly that's what he lives by and believes by. Of course, he grew up at his grandmother's knee, or for as long as she was here with him, and he was 5 when she made her transition. We're very close, and we have been very close. So certainly he believes in unity and the tenets of unity.
So he never went through a challenging, rebellious, oh, this stuff is woo-woo.
No. I would say at that challenging time or that age, I had him here in the church working with me. He was my platform assistant for the most part. So he didn't have the he did not have the rebellion of religion. You know, he might not have attended when he went to college, but all through high school he was here as many Sundays as I was. You know, and again, like I said, once he graduated from college, he hasn't attended as often due to his work schedule, but he attends regularly.
There's a youth mental health crisis in the U.S. and around the world, and I don't know if you can connect it to the increasing secularization. Like a third of Americans are called nuns, where they don't have a religious affiliation, and I'm wondering if you see any connection between increasing, especially girls, anxiety and depression and lack of social cohesion like religious groups can offer?
I think that might be a case. I have not talked specifically. Well, I did have one young lady that I was working with, um, and she started coming to church. But I think that has to do with an issue of not knowing the spiritual self. If you know who you are spiritually, then, not to say and not to put off and poo-poo that you're not going to have some issues, but you can work through them in a different manner if you know your spiritual self. If you don't have that connection, or the connection is what has seemed to be negative, like you're going to hell and there's damn fire and all of that, then yeah, there may be some issues. But I think if you know the truth and connect spiritually, that can lift you out of some of the issues that you might have.
Does the Omaha church have a youth group that's active?
Okay, there are two churches here in Omaha. There's Unity of Omaha, and then there's Christ Love Unity. And currently at this time, Unity of Omaha, I believe, has an active youth group, but we do not. Most of our members are moving towards senior age, and most of the grandchildren are adults. And so they have not come back to the church as much. So yeah, we're working on it, looking at ways that we can reach out into the community and with the young people. There was a time that I was active working in the school system, and because of other obligations, had to pull back from that.
Mm. What got your mother to become a minister, and what got you to become a minister?
Well, as I mentioned, in the 60s, my mother was with Christian Science, and she had stepped back from religion. She was having some issues, and a family friend invited her to Westside Unity Church in Detroit, where we lived, or where she lived at the time. I was in college. And from that time, she says, as many people in Unity and in New Thought will say, I felt like I came home. And so she began to work at Westside, and when Reverend Dr. Ruth M. Mosley started the urban school, although my mother became a licensed Unity teacher prior to that, but when she started at the urban school, she started in with becoming a minister. And I can tell you, in growing up, sometimes you can look back on your life and you can see that path. And so for me, when I say when I was growing up, I could see her on the path of being a minister. She was a minister prior to her taking the training, because of the way she worked with people and cared for people. I you all of the things that she may have taught them, but I know that the relationships that she had opened people's eyes to a different way of what they were experiencing. And so, that was her reason. And again, when I was in full support of her becoming a minister, and at the time I was living in California, and we thought that she might move out to California. She knew she did not want to move back to Detroit because there were too many Unity churches in the Detroit area, and so was looking at some way. I believe that it's now called UW, Unity Worldwide Ministries. It was Association of Unity Churches. They had grants for people who were starting churches or starting ministries. So she applied for and received a grant to pioneer a church. And prior to her starting the church, well, in between the time she moved to Omaha and the first service, I moved from California here to help her. I was in support, wanted to help her in any way. I didn't know that I was going to stay. I thought that, and I can recall one of our founding members said, well, how long are you going to stay? And I told him, oh, 6 months to 2 years. Well, that was 40 years ago. So that tells you something. you know. But yeah, she started and I was here to support her, and I did whatever I could to help her. I did a number of things from secretary to the Sunday school teacher, youth education. I taught classes. I spoke on Sunday when she was out of town. And so again, and you asked my path, and so I think that was my journey as well. I look at it as a young girl, I wanted to be a teacher. I did not go into public education, but as a minister, then I became a teacher. So, I look at my role now, and even not only as a minister, but also within the urban school, I am an instructor with the urban school as well.
So, how long was the training to become a minister? And what were some of the key texts? I know for religious science, it was Ernest Holmes' The Science of Mind was like a key text. So, what was your training?
Okay, so there were 3 years of classes, and the basic texts were from Unity, Lessons in Truth. I'm trying to think the names of Prosperity by Charles Filimore, Healing and Wholeness. I'm just off the top of my head, I'm not thinking about all of them, but I can provide a further list.
Yeah.
But they were the basic Unity books. That was our foundation, our foundational training, and then from there, of course, with working with in the communications and metaphysics, more of that. But I would say first 12 to 15 classes were based in the Unity basics and the Unity authors, Charles and Myrtle Filimore, Cora Filimore, and Emily Cady, and some of the other Unity writers.
Did you get training in counseling therapy? Because a big role of the minister is doing ministerial counseling with congregants on a one-to-one basis, I would think. So did you get any kind of counseling methodology?
Yes, we did have counseling methodology. There is counseling, but then we also, we define the line of what counseling is and how we can counsel a congregant, or where, at what point, we refer them to a professional. We are not professional counselors. And so, if it gets to that point, then we will find resources for the congregant rather than take them down a road that we really don't have the skills for.
In the Church of Religious Science, they have practitioners that you can work with, and they'll do healing work and pray for you and that kind of thing. They're kind of lay people. They're practitioners, so they've had training, but they're not ministers. Is there something like that in Unity?
We have prayer chaplains who will pray with people. So if there is an issue that, they're asking for prayer, then yes, there are prayer chaplains. When you sent that question to me, that took me back to the days of Christian Science, because in Christian Science, there are practitioners whereas that Christian Science does not believe in doctors or hospitals. If there is a medical condition, then you would go to a practitioner, and they will pray with you. I recall those days, visiting, and he was an elderly gentleman, and he would pray with my mother. I recall one time when I was riding my bike and I flipped over the bike and kind of busted open my chin. And my mother called the practitioner and prayed. And then the next day, my lip was still sort of swollen, but I was out eating potato chips. So, as my mother told the story, she said the next day, and I do recall it. So I recall the healing that way also. So, I believe in prayer, definitely, and that others can pray for you, but within unity, you can pray for yourself as well.
Right. And there's been lots of studies, like at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, about the power of thought to increase cell growth, decrease cell growth, increase the rate at which yeast releases oxygen, decrease. I mean, there's thousands of study about my intention has effect. We know that in quantum mechanics, that just observation or looking at some subatomic particle determines if it's a particle or wave. So the whole universe is based on consciousness and
right.
on mind, on thought, I think. Let me just go back to a minute about why did you major in urban studies in college, and how has that helped you?
Well, coming from Detroit, and at the time I went to Michigan State University, that was a forward thought of mine. That was something working within the community and something that I wanted to do. In Detroit at that time, there was a need for working in the community, working in revitalizing the community. And in neighborhoods, there were neighborhoods that were deteriorating. And that was my interest in working in somewhat, it is an offshoot to a certain degree of social work, social services, because it's the organizational framework, but it's also working within the community and working with people. And so that was my thought process for earning that degree. At one time, I thought that I wanted to also be an attorney. So that was also that next step to me in working in the community, but also going into law school. And once I graduated, I found that really was no longer my interest for the law, but it was to work in the community. And I found that, to be honest, because also in working in urban studies, you have the nonprofit background, which relates to the church and the community. Church is a nonprofit organization, and there are so many other things that lend to that blends in with how to utilize the financials, how to learn or work with the financials, how to build the financials in a nonprofit organization. So those were working with boards of directors. All of that comes right back around to working in the church.
And how is it different working in Omaha than Detroit or California? I mean, because each region has its own kind of characteristics.
Right. What I found was that Omaha is probably about 10 to 15 years behind the major cities. So, there's a lot of things that are now just going on in Omaha that had been occurring in the larger cities. When my mother and I moved here, we recognized that one of the major things here in the North Omaha community was there was an interstate or a freeway built right through the community, through the African American community. And basically what that did was broke up. We talked about voting earlier. It broke up the power base for the African American community. It, really split up the voting power within that community by the interstate running through the community. And it dispersed the people that were, together, not only politically, but, as churches. It just completely dispersed the African American community. And so, to be honest about it, when I look at it now, they're all over there. It's dispersed in a way that there is no collective community. There are people living in all parts of the area, so it makes that difference. And I think it also occurred in Detroit and in other municipalities where it went in to break up the power base of a community.
And so you think it was intentional by the power structure?
More than likely.
So is Christ Love Church, what's the composition, the background of the congregants? I mean, is it a center for African Americans, or is it totally integrated?
It's integrated. We have African Americans, Latinos, whites, for the most part, here in our congregation.
So it's kind of an even mixture. No one group predominates.
Well, African American predominates, but we have all.
That's really what Jesus taught, is love thy neighbor as thyself.
Yes.
And he didn't care what our skin color was.
Right.
So have you been able to be, it sounds like you have always worked in the nonprofits doing managerial positions and been a minister. Were you and raised your son? How did you do all that?
Well, I worked in the church, but I wasn't. That wasn't my full time. Because when my mother was living, that wasn't full time. I worked full time, pretty much for the most part. After I moved into Omaha, in the nonprofit community. So I, raised my son. I was a single parent, so I had to interact with his schooling and sports and all of that. But at that time, not really, because like I said, my mother made her transition when my son was 5. But his other grandmother was living and also helped me with that. But I did not have full responsibility of the church. There was an interim minister, as well as we had other speakers in the church where it was not my full responsibility.
And then at some point, you did become the main.
Yes.
And were you? When were you working employed outside as well?
Yes. At that time, I was, and that was before I was the spiritual leader. I was employed, full time, but I was not going to school. It was interesting, and God opens doors. Unity was saying that even for spiritual leaders, you had to have education. You had to either become a licensed Unity teacher or become a minister. And I couldn't go down to the village or go to Detroit because at that time the education was on campus. And so I prayed. It's like, okay, Lord, if this is what I'm supposed to do, show me the way. And my employer was downsizing. And I had Reverend Ruth had already invited me home. They were having a celebration and they were honoring my mother as coming from the first class that was ordained through the urban school. And I had my airline ticket. I went into the meeting. My position was going to be one of those that would be downsized, but it was actually, my position was being combined with another one. And I was working really about 50 to 60 hours as it was in the position that I had, and they wanted to add more work, and I just said no. God had, I answered with, God has something else for me. And went to the celebration, and they announced that they were having an online program.
Wow.
So it was just like that. God opened the door. I did the prayer work, and God opened the door. He shut the door from, because really, to be honest about it, to work 40 to 60 hours or 50 to 60 hours and go to school would not have been doable. And so I went home, and I was able, they announced the online program was starting, so I was really able within less than 6 weeks I left my position. I started school. I still worked. I worked part-time. I was working part-time and going to school part-time.
And when you mentioned Unity Village, is that in Kansas City, Missouri? It's kind of the headquarters of Unity?
Yes, it's Lee Summit, Missouri, which is about 10 to 15 miles outside of Kansas City. And that is the headquarters for Unity.
And so they have a ministerial school there?
They now have their program is online. It was fully on campus, and it was in person. That was something that I wouldn't have not have been able to do. But they also, I think it was about 3 to 5 years after, 3 years after the urban school started the online program. They started an online program also.
And the urban school was in Detroit?
It is based in Detroit. The office, the primary location is Detroit. And we are fully on now.
And you are a faculty person there?
I am the registrar as well as faculty.
And what do you like to teach? What are your courses that you really like to get your teeth into?
I have taught a number of classes. A couple of them was pioneering churches or new church development. I taught board of directors. I've taught financial management. All three of those I taught, and I like teaching them, but now I only, because of my duties as registrar, I only teach one course, and that's History of African American Church.
And does registrar means admissions?
Yes.
And how many students are there in the village school?
Well, in the urban school, we have, I believe it's 60 to 65. I don't have the phone number with me right now.
And what's the gender breakdown? Is it mostly women?
Primarily, yes.
Why do you think that is, that church attendance, I think it's fair to say, is majority female and maybe older women? I mean, just in all denominations.
That's interesting. I believe it maybe comes out of the woman as the caretaker of the family. And so the woman may have more spiritual interest. I think the men are active. There are men that are active within the churches, but they're a lot of times and things have changed. Things are, you're looking at the baby boomers and retirement, but for the most part, men did a lot of the manual labor, a lot of the working outside of the home, and so they, when on Sundays, they were looking at football and relaxing for the week. Whereas the woman, kind of had a little more time. You look at, probably things have changed, I would say, more from the 80s and into the 2000s, where you don't have the 40-hour week. You're working through Saturdays and Sundays, and everybody's working, and now that you're online, there's the 24-hour service. So I think it's different, and I think that's another reason why attendance may have dropped as much, more than what it was in the past when we were growing up. There's just so much that you're keeping your children active. You're working 6 days a week or 7 days a week. The husband and the wife is working, so it makes a difference in the church attendance. And I would say, 70s, maybe 80s,
maybe 80s. And is that true from what you know of majority black churches as well, or is it not true there because the church is such an important social institution?
I think it's true all the way around. Yes. I'm sorry, I forgot to plug in my computer.
So church attendance is going down just partly because people are so distracted and so busy and have so many different opportunities.
Then COVID did not help, where people could sit at home and watch the service online. They didn't have to get dressed. They didn't have to get up and go anywhere. They could just watch it and be done with it. So I think COVID decreased the socialization, or the need for socializing. I can get church, in 45 minutes or whatever the length of the service is, and go on about my day, rather than having to drive a half an hour for some people, or what have you. Where churches used to be in the community where you could walk to church. Now you have to drive to church. So that makes a difference also.
What do you find when you're teaching how to start a church? What do you find is a message that resonates with people? You say, we're starting this new church and we want you to come. How do you get people to come?
Well, again, I think it's in touching the spirituality, and working with God is within, rather than God is without. So many people are, and I won't say so many, but people are looking for a different way of religion. They no longer believe in the hell and damn and sin, and you're a sinner. You were born with sin. I'm a baby. How did I start with sin? So if you can teach that God is within you, and you can create your own world, that makes a difference. I think people are looking for a positive message, rather than what you're going to do when you die. Or you have to wait till you die in order to experience that you can't experience heaven. You can't experience a positive relation right here on earth while you're living.
So when you think about the future of young people and their understanding of spirituality, are you hopeful? Are you pessimistic? what's your thoughts when you think about the future of our nation, I guess.
Well, I'm
Well,
hopeful
I'm hopeful
that if the message
that
is getting
if the
out,
message is getting out,
that
that
I think with the
I
message getting
think
out,
with the message
more
getting
young
out,
people
more
will
young people will
turn to spirituality. They're
turn to
looking for something
spirituality. They're
different.
looking for something
And I
different.
think that's the
And I
whole
think
reason for the
that's the whole
dropout is
reason for the dropout
they
is
don't want
they don't
what
want
was of old.
what
They want
was of
something
old.
different
They
to know
want
that
something different to know
can
that
be lifted up, that
can
they
be lifted
can
up, that they
experience
can experience
a way of living
a way of living that is
more positive.
that is more
I
positive.
believe for the most
I
part, even though
believe for the
all you
most part,
see on the
even though
news
all you
is
see on the
gun
news
violence,
is
I
gun
believe
violence,
that for the
I believe
majority
that
of
for the
young people,
majority of young
they're
people,
looking for a positive
they're
way of
looking for a
living.
positive way of living.
Right. Is anything that we've left out that you would like to add in terms of the future of your church, of spirituality, of your understanding of what makes us tick as human beings?
I don't know.
I don't
I
know.
think we've covered quite a
I think
bit.
we've
Yeah.
covered quite a bit.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
I can't think of anything off
I
the top
can't
of
think
my
of
head
anything
now.
off the top of my head now.
Okay. Thank you.